Well, Parliament's hitting a fairly normal week this week after an unusual start to the year last week. We'll start off with oral questions. The first one from Tamati Coffey to the Minister of Finance about reports on the New Zealand economy. Simon Bridges is asking a question to the Prime Minister about the standards of behaviour for minor parties. Paul Goldsmith to the Minister of Finance about whether he stands by his statements and his policies. Marama Davidson to the Associate Minister of Housing to do with public housing about the Residential Tenancies Amendment Bill. Judith Collins to the Minister of Housing about whether or not the government should compete with other home buyers. Jamie Strange to the Minister of Transport about recent announcements in that portfolio. Michael Woodhouse to the Minister of Health about coronavirus. Chris Bishop to the Minister of Transport about the timing for Auckland Rail. Deborah Russell to the Minister of Revenue on marginal tax rates on the median wage. Shane Retty to the Minister of Education about vocational education. Dr Pamjit Parmar to the Minister of Research about consistent funding to Skyon to help them in their research. And Ginny Anderson to the Minister of Customs about the customs role in keeping communities safe. We'll then go on to the Prime Minister's statement and debate on that. Likely to have about half a dozen speeches over about an hour before we go into the committee stages of the vocational education legislation. And then the Electoral Amendment Act committee stages again in Andrew Little's name. When we finish that, if we finish that, we'll go on to the Arms Legislation Bill, second reading in the name of Stuart Nash. This will be, all three bills actually are quite controversial and likely to have some intense debate. We'll be back again at 2 o'clock tomorrow.